Gradual formation under the influence of early bishops of Rome, with key consolidation by Emperor Constantine and successive popes. Quotes. Time period: 4th century onward. Sunday Sabbath. Officially instituted as a replacement for the biblical Sabbath to align with Roman sun worship. Pagan festivals. Christmas, Easter, and All Saints' Day, linked to Samhain, Halloween, were adapted to Christianize popular pagan traditions. Veneration of saints and Mary. Pagan practices of venerating multiple deities were replaced with the worship of saints and Mary as intercessors. The Bible canon. The Catholic Church preserved the Apocrypha, later called deuterocanonical books, which include Tobit, Judith, Maccabees, and others, as part of the Old Testament canon. The Catholic Church held immense political power during the Middle Ages, enforcing uniformity through the Inquisition and other forms of persecution against dissenters, such as the Waldensians and other Torah-observant groups. Heretics were often burned at the stake, exiled, or forced to convert, reflecting a union of religious and state power. The Catholic Church remains one of the largest Christian institutions, with over 1 billion adherents. It continues to celebrate Sunday worship and traditional holidays rooted in syncretism. Martin Luther, 1483 to 1546. German monk who launched the Reformation by nailing his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church in 1517. John Calvin, 1509 to 1564. French theologian who developed Calvinism, emphasizing predestination and God's sovereignty. Ulrich Zwingli, 1484 to 1531. Swiss reformer who diverged from Luther over interpretations of the Eucharist. Removal of books. Protestants removed the Apocrypha from the Old Testament, reducing the Bible to 66 books instead of the Catholic 73. This decision was based on the belief that these texts were not divinely inspired. Emphasis on sola scriptura, the principle of Scripture alone, as the ultimate authority in faith and practice, though it often interpreted Scripture through a non-Torah lens. Sunday Sabbath and holidays. Despite breaking from Catholicism, Protestants retained Sunday worship and holidays like Christmas and Easter, rejecting Torah observance as legalism. Protestant movements, despite advocating reform, also engaged in persecution. Calvin oversaw the execution of Michael Servetus, a theologian who rejected the Trinity. Dissenters like the Anabaptists were persecuted for their radical beliefs in adult baptism and pacifism. Revelation warns that persecution will arise again, with a beast system enforcing conformity and targeting those who refuse to align with its authority. Revelation chapter 13, verses 15 to 17. Founder: King Henry VIII, 1491 to 1547. Time period: 1534. Reason for formation. Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church after Pope Clement VII refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Retained many Catholic traditions, such as liturgy, Sunday worship, and traditional holidays. Quote. Established the monarch as the head of the Church of England. Under Anglican rule, Catholics, Puritans, and dissenting groups faced imprisonment, exile, or execution if they refused to conform to the state religion. Founder: John Smith, 1570 to 1612. Time period: early 17th century. Reason for formation. Sought to return to New Testament practices, particularly believers' baptism by immersion rather than infant baptism. Retained Sunday worship and traditional holidays like Christmas and Easter. Quote. Advocated for religious liberty, influencing future democracies. Baptists faced persecution from both Catholics and Protestants, particularly in England and Europe, for rejecting infant baptism and state church authority. Founder: John Wesley, 1703 to 1791. Time period: 18th century. Reason for formation: Wesley sought a renewal of spiritual discipline and personal holiness within the Church of England. Retained Sunday worship and traditional holidays. Emphasized social justice and outreach to the poor. Founders: Charles Parham and William Seymour. Time period: early 20th century. Reason for formation: focused on the gifts of the Spirit, particularly speaking in tongues and healing. Retained Sunday worship and traditional holidays. Emphasized revival and charismatic experiences. Founders: William Miller and Ellen G. White. Time period: mid-19th century. Reason for formation: based on Miller's prophetic interpretation, which predicted Christ's return in 1844. Some Adventists, like Seventh-day Adventists, observe Saturday as the Sabbath but still celebrate Christmas. Quote, emphasize biblical prophecy and health reform. Revelation foretells a time of persecution against those who refuse to conform to the laws and traditions of a unified global system. Revelation chapter 13 verses 15 to 17. A beast system will force all to receive a mark, without which they cannot buy or sell. Revelation chapter 17 verse 6. The woman, symbolic of false religion, is described as drunk with the blood of the saints, signifying persecution of the faithful. Galatians. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 prophesies that a power will think to change times and laws, aligning with historical shifts such as the replacement of the Sabbath and biblical feasts with Sunday worship and pagan holidays. As Markellist. These warnings suggest that future persecution will mirror past events, targeting those who hold fast to the commandments of God and the faith of Yeshua. Revelation chapter 14 verse 12. While the original intent of Yeshua's ministry was to guide his followers in a Torah-centered way of life, Christianity's evolution under the influence of Rome and later Protestant reformers largely diverged from this path. Pagan traditions, Sunday worship, and human doctrines replaced biblical commandments and feasts. Yet Revelation and Daniel both point to a faithful remnant who will endure persecution, keeping God's commandments and living by Yeshua's example. This remnant represents a return to the faith once delivered to the saints, standing apart from the traditions of men and anticipating the ultimate restoration of God's kingdom. A culture rooted in obedience to God's commandments and love for one another. None of the religions that emerged after his time were founded or suggested by him. Instead, these movements were created and shaped by human ideas, often influenced by political power, cultural syncretism, and personal interpretations. From the institutionalization of Christianity under Rome to the countless denominational splits, these developments diverged significantly from Yeshua's original teachings. His message was about establishing a way of life, not creating a religion. Yeshua himself lived as an example of Torah observance, honoring the biblical Sabbath, feasts, and commandments while teaching mercy, justice, and faithfulness. Matthew chapter 23 verse 23. In contrast, the man-made traditions of Sunday worship, pagan-rooted holidays, and doctrinal shifts like the Trinity, the Rapture, and once saved, always saved, were introduced by human institutions seeking to mold Christianity into their vision. These changes often prioritized conformity and control over the preservation of the culture Yeshua embodied and taught. As history demonstrates, these religious institutions used their power to enforce uniformity, persecute dissenters, and distance followers from the biblical foundations of faith. The prophetic warnings in Daniel and Revelation remind us that this pattern will continue, but a faithful remnant will resist, choosing to uphold the commandments of God and the faith of Yeshua. Revelation chapter 14 verse 12. The original intent of Yeshua's message was not to create another religion, but to restore humanity's relationship with God through a way of life, one that exemplifies love, justice, and obedience to the Creator. Today more people are rediscovering this truth, seeking to live as Yeshua lived, in alignment with the Torah, and free from the traditions of men.